In this lesson, we're going to talk about what inquiry-based learning is, and then how to manage it in a blended learning environment. So what is inquiry-based learning? Really, it's authentic learning. It's helping to lead students through developing their own questions about a topic, researching it using their own methods and authentic tools, and then sharing those answers. So it's sort of the way we do learning in the real world. If you want to buy a new product and you want to learn things about it, you're probably not going to learn about it by attending lectures. You're probably going to look for advice from trusted experts. You're probably going to read about it. You might look at a website. You might compare it to other products, examine the look and feel, things like that. And that authentic learning process is what we're trying to reproduce when we lead our students through inquiry-based learning. And in a way, it's teaching students to learn. Traditional education is all about delivering content to students. It's all about getting up with a plan, presenting it to them in the most straightforward manner possible through lectures. Conversely, the inquiry-based method, like I said before, is about mirroring authentic learning. So it's very open-ended. It involves using authentic tools to answer questions, and in the best case scenario, questions constructed by students. So how does one go about planning inquiry-based learning? Well, the first step is to determine your objectives, and this is very important in inquiry-based learning. We should still be working with the same sorts of standards that we work with in traditional learning. We should want our students at the end to be able to know and do a lot of the same things, but the difference is the procedure of getting there. So once we've looked at those objectives, we want to formulate a question. And that can either be done in conjunction with the students or it can be done by the teacher, depending on sort of the maturity level of the students, their familiarity with the topic, and their familiarity with inquiry-based learning. So different questions have different scales and determines whether it will be a lesson of inquiry-based learning or a unit of inquiry-based learning. For example, you or your students studying population might ask a question like, which country has the biggest problem with population? And that's a smaller scale question as opposed to something like, what effect will a larger population have on the world in the future? Of course, then you want to design an assessment. Good backwards design starts with an assessment and then builds instruction from there. So how will you know your students have learned an answer to this question? And so it might be writing a report or any other number of things. And depending on how involved your product is, if it's really involved product, a really authentic product, then you might get into project-based learning, which is the topic of the next lesson. But for now, we're going to focus on the process of inquiry. So we'll assume some sort of paper, for example, as the assessment. It might also be the construction of a wiki, the creation of a video, a post on a collaboration activity, something of the sort. And so now you have a question and you have an assessment at the end. So now you and your students need to fill in the middle. So you as the content area expert now at this point should be curating a set of resources for your students to answer this question. What are the resources they will need in order to answer the question? The key is picking resources that are authentic and engaging. You don't want to just give them the textbook and tell them, oh, read chapter 21 and learn the answer. Because one, they're all going to come up with the same answer. Two, it's not an authentic process. You might give them databases in your field. You might link them to online museum archives. You might take them to the library to use its databases, whatever authentic resources you have access to. And then, instead of lecturing them on the topic, you're just going to guide them as they discover things about the topic themselves as individuals or groups. And then they'll create a product, again with your guidance and with clear rubrics, and you'll assess it. It's very important in this process that you be comfortable with giving up some control. It's very different from the traditional classroom, but it will prepare them for the sorts of independent research they'll have to do in 21st century knowledge jobs and in academia and college after school. So since the process is so open, and since it requires so much student autonomy, the LMS is going to be a huge help to you in keeping the activity structured and helping the students know what they're doing without having to ask constant questions to you directly. And so in this process, the LMS plays a very different role from what it does in the traditional linear course. You can think of your LMS as sort of the home base in your inquiry-based blended learning unit. So in the folder for your inquiry-based unit, you're going to have instructions for the unit as a whole. You're going to have the questions and instructions on the assessments and instructions overall on what to do so that your students don't have to constantly ask you questions for what they need to do. So it's important to have lots of clear instructions there. It's also where you're going to keep your links to your resources. Any online resources that this activity is using, the link should be there, clearly labeled with clear instructions for students to get out to those resources, and also descriptions of where they can find material resources in your room. The LMS is also a great place for collaboration. Now, obviously, in a blended classroom, we do have the advantage of students being face-to-face, but there's also a great advantage in having a space online for students to store materials, to take notes and things like that, especially if they're working in groups. One of the best parts of using your LMS well in a long-term project like this is having it be the place where students save their information. So if you require every day that students working in a group post their materials to the content management system or to a blog or discussion board, then if one student is absent, you don't have the issue of all the other students claiming, oh, well, I don't have to do anything because Josh had the materials and he's absent today. And then, of course, having assessments there in that unit can really be helpful for students.